I see 6 members. That means we have a quorum. So, okay, being recorded. Thank you, Kira.
You're welcome, Marty. I'm
Dan,
gonna sign out.
hold-
Have a good,
No, hold
oh.
on a second. Hold on, please. Dan, make you co-host because when I put up my screen for screen sharing, I can't see raised hands.
Okay, I
Okay,
just made Jan co-host.
great.
Marty,
Yeah, hold on a second. So, Kira, have a great evening and thank you very much.
Okay, have a good meeting. Let me know if there's any issues. Good night.
Good night. Dave?
yes,
Thanks, Kira.
click on participants on the bottom.
Yes.
Do you see a white bar on the right?
I know how to use that. I just focus myself on my screen share. And until
Okay,
they
it's
move-
just, it shows the raised hands.
It may do if I look at it. And if I don't, it doesn't help me any.
Okay, well, I didn't know you weren't looking. Okay, just trying to help.
I appreciate that. Okay, as I indicated, we have a quorum. I am going to ask the board members if there's no one with a any objection. I'm going to change the sequence of the meeting, starting off first with Eric, then we'll go to Alex, and then Chairman's report, and then the other item, which is the guidelines, and we'll end the meeting with approval of the minutes. And I'm sure Lisa will keep me on track to make sure I don't forget. Having said all of that, I was at an event 2-3 weeks ago when we had the pleasure, I had for the first time, a chance to meet our soon-to-be, I hope, Congressman. And Eric was there. And it dawned on me, the questions that I have raised over time has been a question of that I thought that Eric could more easily, where'd it go? Come on, there it is. I thought Eric could more easily answer than I could in terms of doing the necessary research to be knowledgeable. That being said, these are, I say I'm going to Eric first. These are the questions I'd like Eric to talk about, and I'll just mention them first and then turn the chair over to him. I'm sure you all know Eric, by the way, former member of Community Board 8, chair of the Aging Committee or the Committee on Aging. So Eric, I'd like you to talk about the concept. I mean, I always thought that the state legislature was similar to our federal legislature, bicameral, and they follow the same basic rules, but they do not, I learned. And city council is not bicameral. It's all by itself. So I'd like you to talk about how that system works. And then each month I go through the calendar, legislative calendar, which I apologize to the committee now. It should have gone out this afternoon, but it should have gone out days ago. And I have not had a chance to really go through it like I usually do. I did order and collect all of the items by committee, so that should be helpful, but I haven't outlined or highlighted any. But it indicates a column of phases, and in the phases, you have introduction, resolution, enacted, mayor's message, petition. What am I covering up? I can't see. Petition, land use application in that column. In the next column, there is status. Received, ordered, printed and filed, committee filed, adopted, enacted, companion pending approval by council, laid over in committee, withdrawn. A lot of stuff going on. So I'm hoping you'll be able to walk us through that. And the one that bothers me constantly is I see all of these, I see many of them, which says the action being taken by the city council is to amend the city charter. considering how difficult it is to get a city charter in the first place. The constant amending, and you'll note the yellow, I have I took out one in which Eric was the chief sponsor, and it was already enacted concerning Veterans Affairs, and the words right there, amend the New York City Charter. So Eric, I turn to you and I thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Marty. And I'm going to apologize in advance for if I cut out with the service. I'll go through. You introduced me, but for those of you who may have popped on after, I'm Eric Dinowitz. I'm probably your city council member. I cover almost the entirety of Community Board 8, and I was a member of the board. I wasn't on this committee. I chaired the aging committee, and I was on, of course, land use and traffic and transportation, like most people are, and I was on education because I was a teacher, and that was like, I still love it. I'll go through your sort of syllabus, if you will, your guiding questions, and the bicameral versus unicameral. You know, most states in the country, I think, except for Colorado, the states have a bicameral legislature, which means there are two different houses. I guess that's modeled off of the federal government, except the difference is the federal government, I believe, is the only part of government where representation is not based off population. The US Senate. In the states, it's one person, one vote, which means it's in one way or another based on population. The Senate, state Senate, and the Assembly, there are different. There, I think, are 150 assemblymen and I think 63 senators. So senators have bigger districts. In the city, we have 51 members. It's one house, and it's our districts are about 160,000 people large. You know how it works out in the state. You know, each house crafts a bill, or they have to find a partner from the Senate to get legislation passed. Over the years, it's been interesting because for most of my memory in the state, it was a Democratic Assembly and a Republican Senate. So very often a Democratic Assembly member would have to find a Republican partner in the Senate to get bills passed. And that changed in 2018, where most of the stuff is Democrat led. And that's kind of how it is in the council. Most bills are the prime sponsor. I mean, the person who introduced it and drafted legislation is going to be a Democrat. Interestingly, though, there are bills that Republicans introduced. Some of them pass, and a lot of them are, you know, quality of life stuff. I think there was the most recent one I remember was one dealing with when homeowners knock down, either on purpose or accident, a tree that belongs to the Parks Department, what the restitution is for the Parks Department from the homeowner. That was introduced by a Republican, but had a lot of Democratic co-sponsors. This Republican represents a lot of homes where that happens, but a lot of Democrats represent homeowners. You know, there's a lot of, you have to work with everyone in the council to get things passed. So there's actually going through the phases of a bill. The thing is, once you get through the phases, you don't have to go through the process of getting another house to approve it. But the process is a little more extensive than introducing it, resolution enacted. So the first thing that happens is an LS request. That's a hold, which is different than I think most legislatures do. So the way it works is this: I have an idea for a bill. So one of my ideas for a piece of legislation was creating a voter guide. So one of the ones I'm working on now is to require that the voter guide that you all get in the mail include all races on the ballot. Right now, it only includes the municipal elections and maybe sometimes ballot referendum. My bill would have it include anything that appears in the ballot. And this came from an idea I had when on election day on June 22nd, 2021, when everyone was marching into the polls and they knew exactly who they were voting for mayor, for council, for everything, but not for judges, which are state elections, not for the DA's office, which is a state office. And so I had this idea. So I go into a computer system called SharePoint, and I pretty much type in the idea I have, what it's called, and a little summary of what it is. What happens after that is someone from the bill drafting department, is a legal team, looks at your idea, and the first thing they do is they see if it conflicts with anything else another legislator had put in already. We won't know whose it is because there's anonymity in this, but it's called first in time. All right, so if I'm first in time, if I'm the first person to think of this idea, then they say, all right, first in time, now we're gonna have you talk to bill drafters. It's gonna go to the bill drafting department and we'll draft the bill. And for instance, the veterans bill, that this one passed, the charter amendment, I did a lot of work with the draft, with the bill drafting department, and I did, and back and forth with some advocates, some veterans, to make sure their voices were reflected in that legislation. And so then after it's all drafted, then it is introduced at a stated meeting. And a stated meeting is where all the council members meet and vote on legislation. It's introduced.
Do we lose you, Eric?
All right. It's
We lost
so
you for a while.
introducible. It's okay. It's you got to the part where you introduce the bill, so it's on the agenda at a stated meeting, and then so everyone knows that this bill exists. Then the speaker has to assign it to a committee. In the instance of the veterans bill that I passed, that was my committee. I chaired the veterans committee, so we discussed it during one of our committee meetings. Then a vote is scheduled in a committee. Then we vote on it in committee, and then it has to be aged for 8 days, meaning it's going to be on your desk.
Eric, we lost you again. Eric, we lost you again.
All right, now.
Eric, you're gone.
You hear me? Yes.
Here right now. Oh,
All right, I'm in the. Okay, do you hear me?
at the moment I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, the Wi-Fi kicked in on my phone, so I'm going to be on my phone. Anyway, so to fast forward, the bill ages for 8 days, and then the next week we can, as soon as the next week we can vote on it. And that is how a bill becomes a law. It's a little more, it's a little more involved. What I like about it is that it's a little more democratic, I guess, because it's not necessarily who's best friends with the speaker. I have an idea for a bill, I put it in, and it becomes my bill. You can introduce something with people. So I've been the co-prime sponsor on a couple of bills. For example, the resolutions like the New Deal for CUNY, I was the co-prime sponsor, meaning I didn't put it in the computer system, but I worked with its prime sponsor, Justin Brennan, to be co-prime sponsor. And a bill supporting Holocaust education that was put in by Marjorie Velasquez, and I was the co-prime sponsor on that. And this process is the same. It goes through that whole process. And right now, there's a few pieces of legislation that I'm working on. I'll just name a few. I have a little list here. The voter guide bill I mentioned. There's a fire safety bill. You know, I got something in the mail from the FDNY, and it was I got something in the mail from the FDNY, and it was almost unreadable. It was not ADA compliant. It did not. It really wasn't accessible to people in to people who spoke languages other than English. And so I have legislation to amend that. I have another piece of legislation I'm working on, another fire safety piece of legislation. Other pieces of legislation. So I mentioned the voter guide bill. That came up from my idea. But there are other ideas that come up from you, people like you, or community groups. You know, one such example is we had two community organizations actually, who were having issues with the DEP, where they said one thing, the DEP said that they told these groups information. These groups had no record of it, and then they were hit with like huge water bills. So because of that, I'm working on legislation to require the DEP to provide certain pieces of information in writing. I'm working on legislation based on complaints from constituents about 311, and the goal that these two bills I'm working on, the goal is to provide feedback systems and improve efficiency of 311. When you do an LS request, by the way, the bill stays like secret until it's introduced. So all these bills that I'm talking about, and there's a bunch more I'm working on, they're not going to be public until I introduce them. So I'm kind of giving you a little inside information of things that maybe some of my colleagues don't know I'm working on, but you all now know that I'm working on them because you're my community board. I feel like I could share with you. So that's a little bit of legislative process. A couple of the bills I'm working on. I don't know if there are any questions from any of the members or any of the guests here, but I'm always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, but could you first address why the city charter is constantly being changed, amended?
Yeah, the city charter, I mean, the city charter is huge. I think things like the state constitution, the city charter are very long documents. It's not like the United States Constitution, which you can fit in your pocket. And the example of my veterans bill, the definition of a veteran is in the city charter. And a lot of what the city agencies do is in the city charter. So some of the bills we pass are amendments to the charter. Some of the bigger things like big changes to campaign finance reform are done through referendum, even though I think some of them can be done by simple votes. Other things are local laws. I think everyone's favorite is Local Law 11, where they put the scaffolding and they're making sure the bricks don't fall out of your building. There are resolutions, which are really just city council statements. So another resolution that I co-sponsored was support for the people of Ukraine. And that was one that I got through with my colleague, Ina Vernikov, who's from Ukraine, and the Jewish Caucus. We all kind of worked together to push that through. So there are different types of bills that could be passed, resolutions, charter amendments, local laws, but they all follow the same process.
Thank you. I have one last question, but I'm going to open it to the committee. Anybody have a question? If not, I'd like to get your comments on this. Last month, we had these 3 items in the spreadsheet. 2 of them already enacted. The third one is under discussion, and we're waiting to hear more detail about it. It concerns sidewalk restaurants and the nonsense with, I say nonsense because I don't particularly like DOT. But that's where we are at this point. Could you tell us where we are at this point?
Yeah, so the first two are from 2020, and that was at the it looks like at the beginning of the pandemic. They sort of like quickly made this program. I get it quickly made the program to create outdoor seating to really save the restaurants. The current legislation. So I 2 weeks ago I did a tour with Councilmember Velasquez, who chairs the Consumer Affairs Committee, a couple members of the Community Board, and Edonis Rodriguez and other members of the Department of Transportation about outdoor seating. So the situation is this: they held a hearing on this, and it was like an 8-hour hearing or something on this legislation. And the legislation legislates the outdoor seating. There are a lot of I like outdoor seating as a concept. I love the idea of being able to go out and eat outdoors. I love the ability it provides for restaurants. Whenever there's another wave for people to come and feel safe eating at a restaurant. But there are concerns that are currently not addressed in the legislation. So for example, enforcement is one, aesthetics are another. So I went out with a tape measure, and even though I got all the assurances from DOT that we've never had an issue with it being past 96 inches, I went out with my tape measure and showed that one of them on Johnson Avenue was 114 inches from the curb. You know, some of them are not safe. They don't have the I guess they're called Jersey barriers. They don't have the concrete in the middle to separate the diners from the cars. God forbid a car gets out of control. And some of them are just like sheets of wood that are not very pretty. In other districts, they're used as storage, and they really do earn the name sidewalk sheds because that's what they look like. So some of the language that I'm working on with the bill's sponsor and with the administration is just to say, if there's one thing I want, it's to have local oversight over it. It's to say it's like a local community board or the local council member can say, you know what, this, you have to make sure you're complying with 96 inches, or, you know, maybe this isn't the right street for it. Similar to what we do with liquor licenses with the state, right? They come before the community board and we approve or disapprove. In the legislation right now, they have the community board has 30 days to review an application. And I think that that is not enough time for a community board who has a committee meeting and then a full board meeting to review anything. So I'm looking at 60 days. Another member of the board suggested 45 days. So this is part of the process, especially a process that impacts an entire city. For me, it's recognizing that the answers in CB8 are not the answers on Fifth Avenue, are not the answers on Borough Park. Recognizing those differences, other people have issues with the fact that the DOT is supposed to be enforcing this, and a lot of people on the committee and the community have deep concerns about the DOT, let's say, doing that.
I was at the morning session. I was by Zoom. I was at the morning session, and the complaints raised by community boards throughout the city were quite voluminous. But one issue just right now is that when and if this law gets passed, everyone who already has a permit is going to reapply, and the deluge that's going to hit community boards, even our board, is going to be, 30 days is ridiculous.
Yeah. So yes, I think 60 days for all those applications is also ridiculous, which means that in the first phase, it would have to be phased in. But this is, why it's so important that I bring the commissioner and I bring the bill sponsor to the district to talk with people in Riverdale. She's from, Morris Park, City Island. She represents that area. Some of the issues are the same, some are different, but it's important that she and the commissioner see that these differences exist, hear real life concern of how these things function. I'm going to keep working on it to make sure that outdoor seating can work, but work for everyone.
Okay, well, other than keeping DOT in check, which doesn't seem to be even feasible at this moment. Again, anybody
Well-
on the committee have a question?
Yeah, I would just add that there are other council members who think it should not be in the hands of DOT. It should be some other city agency that can actually handle it, because DOT has trouble handling paint sometimes.
Okay, well, Eric, I'm going to thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate the time you spent with us.
Sure
and,
thing.
Whatever you're doing at the Y, I hope you enjoy yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
And-
everyone.
Happy
Thank you.
Passover
Have a good Pesach, everyone.
and happy Easter, whoever I left out. All right.
All
Thank
right,
you.
bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. So Alex, I turn it to you now.
I am
I
here.
Appreciate the fact that you set a captive audience on this. But now it's our pleasure to hear from you. To
Okay.
members of the committee, Alex has spoken for us, to us previously, and been a font of great information. And it's my pleasure to invite him back. Based on last month's meeting, there were 3 questions laying out there. I added a 4th one here, and I've fed all the information to Alex. I'll let him speak. The only thing with the last one is ethical times. Last month, there was a puzzle, a Wordle type puzzle. I solved it. I never got my Cadillac. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, Marty, given the extreme budget constraints of the New York City Conflicts of Interest Board and the multiple correct answers that we receive on every one of the puzzles, we actually have to do a random drawing of all of the correct answers to see who's the winner. So I'm sorry you were not the winner, but I congratulate you on getting it correct. Please try again next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, the floor is yours, Alex. Thank you.
All right, friends, thanks for having me on. There's 3 things on this list. I'll do them one at a time in order, just on the list. The first one, topic A here, under bullet 4, is probably the one that I'll spend the most time on, because it's the one that probably has the most, or I don't know, but it's one that offers a little bit of nuance for a couple of different reasons. The general guidelines for political activities for city employees and or city agencies is actually very simple. And I'm going to put it in a way, it's sort of a via negativa sort of idea about like what city agencies can actually be involved in the announcement of campaigns or sponsorship of debates or giving candidates time and space to blah, blah, blah. It's actually quite few. We're talking about the Campaign Finance Board and the Board of Elections. For the rest of us at all city agencies, whether it's the Conflicts of Interest Board or the Police Department or the Department of Education, where you might argue like, hey, a DOE school sponsoring a debate, wouldn't that be a great idea? And it would be a great idea in some respects for the children, but it would be a bad idea from the point of view that government resources, taxpayer dollars, are not supposed to go to any kind of electioneering, election-related activity, except for the funds and the matching programs and the other kinds of programming that is sponsored by the Board of Elections and the Campaign Finance Board, which is kind of, not to editorialize too much, but it's kind of fun to speak about those 2 people like in the same breath, because they're very much diametrically opposed. Like the Campaign Finance Board is this very new agency full of technology and sort of, technocrats, and the Board of Elections certainly has been around for a long time and does not have that cutting edge modern reputation. But in any case, those are the 2 agencies that basically can talk about candidacies and electioneering, and the rest of us can't. And that means when we think about the time and resources that a community board devotes to its very important business of the district, none of the community board's resources are supposed to be devoted to electioneering either. And so a community board doesn't give a candidate an opportunity to come address the meeting of the community board. And what's interesting about that, of course, is that many times you're going to have a current legislator, like the speaker who preceded me, the Honorable Councilmember Dinowitz, come out and speak about the workings of the city, because he is fulfilling his city function. And Councilmember Dinowitz full well knows that if at any moment in this meeting that he just had with you, he went, and by the way, now that you listen to me, shouldn't you vote for me? He would have veered off into electioneering in a way that would have been inappropriate for him to do, and might put him on the wrong side of the conflict of interest law, but also would have not been in the spirit of what a community board meeting is for, which is the government business that the legislator is responsible for, and not the legislator's own interest in their own political future or in the political futures of other people running, so that, they don't, spend time promoting other people's campaigns. So that's sort of as a matter of government policy and principle, none of our agencies, mine, yours, anybody else's, is supposed to devote time to any kind of electioneering, campaign activity, give space for candidates to come and talk about, hey, I'm running, you should vote for me, or don't vote for that guy or that person, that lady, whatever. So that's kind of simple, I think. But the extension of that, and one that was brought, or actually, you know what? I'll do part two in a second. Let me pause there for a moment, which is something I frequently forget to do. I don't want to talk longer than I have to if people already have questions. Does anybody have a question so far about anything that I've said?
Yeah, did I cross the line? Did I cross the line when I said a comment about congressional office?
Well, we're pretty, here's what I would say, Marty. Don't go reporting yourself yet. But what I would say is that, I'll give you an example. If I tomorrow said at some class, right, of ethics training class, and I wouldn't do this because I'm so trained not to do this, but let's say I said, I hope Ralph Nader gets elected president, right? Probably, I don't think anyone could take that seriously as electioneering, because Mr. Nader is probably not going to run again, and certainly not going to win, even, despite how I feel about it. And we're also very far away from a presidential election, right? The greater the propinquity to election coming up, the more the more somebody's like actually running, the more I think probably we should avoid those kinds of comments, because while, in a way, sort of the political discourse and let's face it, the media environment that we are in, sort of talking about candidacies is sort of like this currency that we all have, like we're fed, news 24/7 about people running for office or people in elective office. But I think probably, observing these kind of principles of public service, as we get closer to actual people running in actual elections and voting time is coming up, I think we should stay further and further away from making any sort of comment about who we hope for to be elected, etc. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one thing. Any other questions before I move on to the individual, the burden, or rather not the burden, is the responsibility of the individual community board member who may want to be politically engaged. Anybody got a question?
Is this on this question?
Yes, it is.
Yes, if that's okay.
Yes, please, Camelia. Oh, yes, and you even used your hand raising thing. How?
I'm very polite on these things.
And
But
also
I'm trying.
good with the technology, so good for you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. A little bit of the opposite question actually to Martin. I was wondering about the sort of appropriateness of community board members to express views as to, let's say, on a community board open meeting, you know, such and such elected is doing an amazing job, but such and such elected are terrible and should not be re-elected. Is that appropriate?
Okay, this is a really good question. And I think that here's the ideal scenario on this. The ideal scenario is that if one has a problem with certain policies that the city is currently enacting, let's make sure as community board members, we're talking about how the city is doing these policies. Now, it may be that we're talking about a policy related to a bill that a certain council member is responsible for introducing, a process we just heard more about how that happens, et cetera. So I'm not going to say that it's always problematic for a community board member to tie a policy to a particular elected official. But what I am saying is problematic is to directly tie the policy to the elected official because one is trying to either prop up that person's electoral chances or reduce them is problematic. So you could imagine someone really going out of their way to always talk about the greatness of one single elected official. At some point that feels like electioneering, you know? But I wouldn't, and the conflicts of interest board, who cares what I think? The conflicts, look, I know that everybody's a little nervous because of the case that is not to do with political activities, but the one that we're going to talk about today that had to do with the person who represented their organization before the community board. And I'm going to talk about that case, but one thing I want everybody to take away from tonight is that it is assumed by the conflict of interest board that people who are at these community board meetings are there for the right reasons and they're doing things the way they should be doing. And they've got people like Marty and his committee helping them to do those things. In other words, do we act on complaints? Sure. And when we get a complaint, there's going to be an assessment. There's going to be questions. We're going to find out if there really was a violation. But I don't want anybody to feel like there's like an army of COIB lawyers who are going over the minutes of your public meeting to see what wordage you used. Because we can't, right? There's not enough of us. And also, you know, like I think probably, you know, in the grand scheme of things, there's lots of people working on many big fish things. So when I say like, here's the spirit of this, I want people to act on their own, trying to stay away from violations. And I think the way to do that is to make sure that the color of our speech is about the community board business and not getting somebody elected or making sure they don't get reelected. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. Excellent. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions before I move on to the second part of the political activities question? Going once, going twice. Okay, here we go. Now, the other thing that happens at community boards is, of course, sometimes there are community board members who themselves want to run for office, or there are community board members who themselves would like to be engaged in political activity to get someone else elected for office. Now, both of those things are fine. You as a community board member are absolutely free to volunteer your own time and your own resources and your own free speech to get anybody elected who you want. The big restrictions are you don't use community board time, you don't use community board resources, and you don't use the name of the community board to do any sort of electioneering for yourself or for someone else. Now, when I say those general rules, how does that manifest itself? Well, there's easy stuff, right? I never make campaign literature with community board resources, for example. But I also, as a community board member, do not sponsor or speak or try to get resolutions spoken about that are about the horribleness of the person I'm running against. Let's say I'm a community board member and I'm running against a council member in this district where I'm a community board member. I can advocate policies that my opponent is against, absolutely, but to to take that advocacy, which is community board business, and by bringing in the name of the person I'm running against and talking about what a terrible job they've done and how much better of a job I would do in their place, is to hijack the meeting for a non-community board purpose. And that's the place where we need to be careful. So what's interesting and difficult about this is that the community board and individual members are going to have legitimate interests in all kinds of policies, some of which the legislators are for and some of which the legislators are against. And that includes a community board member who's also running for office. So I would advise any community board member who is going to run for office to talk to us proactively to get a sense of how to continue to effectively serve the community board by being a really good advocate for the community and not turn that great advocacy into something that feels like to the public or to fellow board members is starting to be hijacked by this outside political interest of getting elected. It may be word choices, it may be proper nouns, it may be thinking about the precise scope of the proposal to make sure that the constraints are only about what's going on in the district, because this community board 8, that's what it's supposed to be about. But we will help you on a fact-specific basis with those things as they come up. Maybe we can even do something global so you don't have to call us every week or whatever. But because it can be a little bit tricky, I would advise anybody who's running to just talk to us so we can give you the guidance to keep you on the right side of that. The simple stuff is the simple stuff, right? If you're advocating for other people, you're doing it in your private capacity. Can you endorse as a private citizen? Of course you can. But what you can't do, just like I can't do, is I can't take the city letterhead that's devoted to me, which is the Conflict of Interest Board letterhead, for me to do the Conflicts of Interest Board's business and write a political endorsement on that, because now I'm, using city resources for an electioneering activity. And not only that, but I'm kind of pushing my personal point of view out to make it seem like it's my agency's point of view. And both of those things are problematic under the law. Okay. Questions about that? Marty? No?
None?
Okay. So the second question is one that, fortunately for me and unfortunately for you, is not within the purview of the New York City Conflicts of Interest law. My vague understanding of this notion is that there is a directive or some kind of memo from the law department that explains the extent to which this restriction operates and how it works. And so, Marty, I will find out who the person is over at the law department who authored that, or is the person who now has to think about these things over there. I don't know, maybe they're not there anymore, but I will find that out and then I can direct you to that person. But that's not the question of I think that factually where this came up was that do you guys remember that kind of wacky thing we had with the back-to-back charter revision commissions? Like we did one with the mayor and then everybody said, well, we don't like what you did. So now we're gonna have another one, right? So the Sal Albanese one, the second one, where eventually it passed. And one of the questions that passed was, should we have term limits for community board members or not? And I think a lot of community boards felt like they should be able to have an official opinion about whether or not term limits were a good thing. And that's not a crazy idea. I mean, you're talking about a community board. They know a lot about the business. They could maybe speak to, the value of institutional memory or the shift in power dynamics away from the board members to the staff if you're going to have new turnaround. Those are what you always talk about when you talk about term limits, right? There was a big term limit debate in the 90s about whether or not you could have term limits for federal legislators, right? There was even a lawsuit about it. And eventually they decided that states didn't have the power to enact that law. But all the debate about it was like, well, what would happen if you had term limits? I've actually done a little research on this topic. I'll tell you what, the results are always not what they promise you. Just that's shorthand. One of the things that the term limits people tell you on the legislative side is that what's going to happen is you're going to have citizen legislators who only serve for their 2 terms, and then they're going to bend their spears into plowshares, and they're going to go back home and take up private life. Except that's not what happens. They just run for something else, right? That's what happens. But in any case, so I understand why community boards felt like they were well positioned to offer the public some informed opinions about whether or not term limits would be good or not. And the law department said, I don't know why, maybe because it was an issue that would directly affect the community boards. It wasn't the place of the community board to comment on the issue or take an official opinion on it when it was going to be directly affected. So now, I'm sure there's constitutional justification for that. I'm sure they thought about it all. I don't know any of it. So Marty, I'm going to have to put you in touch with the law department individual who is paid to both know the answer to that question and give the answers to that question. Hopefully that's the same person. And I'll follow up with you on that issue. Okay.
Thank you.
Here's number 3. Number 3 has to do with what I think was communicated to me, a little bit of a chilling effect from a case that arose at Community Board 12. I'm going to review with you the facts of the case as stipulated in the disposition because they're important. There was a person serving on Community Board 12 who was also employed by the Armory up in up north, right? And the Armory rents a bunch of the Armory Foundation is what she worked for. And the Armory Foundation is this not-for-profit that rents the Armory from the city and provides all these services, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now her job was this before she got appointed to the community board. So I don't know how anybody didn't spot this, but her job explicitly was she was paid by the Armory to be the liaison to the community board that she served on, among other things. That was one of her things that she did in her job. So we now get to a point where the Armory Foundation did something that the community board didn't like. Doesn't matter what it is. I don't know. I have no opinion. The disposition does not have any opinion about whether the community board was right or wrong. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the community board members, or as a body, felt like the committee that is like health and welfare, whatever it's called, wanted to, have a resolution saying, hey, we need some different standards. So there's some city controls on the Armory. And then they were going to put it to vote at the community board meeting. And then the chair took it off the agenda. But this community board member, and remember, her outside job is she's paid by the Armory to liaise with Community Board 12. She speaks at that meeting. Now, somebody at the meeting goes, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You're employed by these people, and therefore you can't speak right here because you're employed by these people. And the parliamentarian said, oh, no, that's fine. And it's fine because she's just going to use the 3Ds. She's going to disclose her conflict. She's then going to be free to discuss like everybody else. And then she doesn't vote. And you know the 3Ds because I talk about them every time we do the biennial training. And I still believe in the 3Ds. It's still true, even though this bizarre outlier case, it wasn't true. And why wasn't it true? Because when you use the 3Ds, like let's say your co-op, right, has got some zoning issue and there's like you're on the co-op board, right, that you're going to use the 3Ds. You're going to say, hey, I own an apartment in this co-op. Now I'm going to tell you how what I think the vote should be. And then I do not vote on the issue. That is classic, good. In this case, it's different because this person was being paid by the Armory to say these things at the community board meeting. And she said things like, she didn't say, well, as a community board member, I think blah, blah, blah. She said, we at the Armory, blah, 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 blah. And it's not really, I don't want to get caught up in the word choices here. Although I think if you were being extra careful, you probably would be. She didn't get fined on her word choices. She got fined because she was being paid by her bosses to be at that meeting and take a stand that was whatever it was. It was advocating on behalf of her private employer, which is different than sitting there as a community board member and saying, by the way, guys, that's my employer. Here's my opinion. Now, the reason why people were quaking on this too is because if that's all that had happened, where she did it one time and the parliamentarian had maybe gotten this thing wrong a little bit, you know, I'm not sure that you would have seen a $1,500 fine. I don't know. And in fact, you know what? It's probably wrong for me to comment on that kind of thing. What I will say is the board takes the totality of the circumstances of the case to assess the fine. So let's talk about what happened next. What happened next was that the committee that she was not on took up the issue again, and they wanted the president or the leadership of the Armory Foundation to come talk to the committee about whatever issues that they had problems with. A day before that person was supposed to come out, they let the committee know that the community board member who worked for the Armory was going to be one of two people who was going to make the presentation. That night or that day, that community board member called us for advice and said, can I represent the Armory Foundation at the meeting? And the attorney said, no, you cannot do that. Because again, this is not being a community board member and saying, that's my employer. This is her like working for the Armory Foundation, doing the job that they have assigned her to do to advocate for her employer before this committee. She wasn't even on this committee. So you can't tell me she was there as a community board member. There's no reason for her to be there, except that she's there privately as the advocate for the organization. And I think there was another follow-up meeting as well beyond that, where she did the same thing or roughly the same thing, where she was advocating, and clearly she's wearing the Armory Foundation hat, not the community board member hat. And for all of those places where the line was crossed, not just that single first one, the total fine for all the violations was $1,500. The community board member admitted that those were violations. The facts are in the disposition, but that's essentially the problem. And I think while it's a good case to bring up, because you're like, whoa, I hope that doesn't happen to me, I think it's very unlikely to happen to you unless you're doing the following. Like, here's the example, right? So let's say I own a bar. This is completely hypothetical, right? But well, because I don't own a bar, but like, let's say I own a bar and I'm also a community board member. My liquor license is coming up for application or a re-up at the community board. We all know that I'm supposed to use the 3Ds. So I say, I disclose, hey, that's my bar. Then I discuss, I could say, look, we've been in the neighborhood 20 years. I sponsor the softball team. Why wouldn't you re-up me? I'm great, right? And then I don't vote. That's fine. But let's say that the Public Safety Committee's got a problem with me. And they're like, you know what? We're not buying this thing. There's been these problems, too much noise, too many cigarette butts, too much this, too much that, too much crime. We don't like it. We're going to take up business later. And so I'm like, oh man, I need to make a presentation as the bar owner to that Public Safety Committee. I can't do that, right? Somebody else has got to do it. I got to get an attorney. I got to get a business partner. I got to get somebody else to be the advocate at that meeting that's going to go before the public safety meeting. Because that's not the same thing as, participating in the discussion and voting on the thing. That's an advocacy issue. And that's a distinction I would draw here, is that this person was not being dinged on the thing that you guys do all the time when you're speaking about the co-op or the business you own or the zoning variance or the not-for-profit you work at. This particular person, it was their job to interface with Community Board 12, and essentially they were executing their private employment when they did it, when they spoke at Community Board 12. Does that make sense? No? Okay.
Yes.
My friend whose name is Stephen Fruit, talk to me a little bit. Take yourself off mute. Sorry, you're off mute. You're on mute. My bad.
Marty asked us to think about a distinction that might explain the result in that COIB determination. And I honestly, I never gave this much thought until Marty brought these things up. I can understand that, for example, at a lot of meetings, there's priority given to members of the board to speak.
Right.
So, for example, members of the board can ask questions at the gallery session of a full board meeting, and members of the public can't. At a committee meeting, the members of the committee speak first, and I think second are the members of the board, and third are members of the public, because committees are supposed to be like hearings. But there are definitely priorities given and preferences and privileges given to community board members. I can see that if she, in wearing her community board hat, entitling her to speak at a meeting, the discussion over a resolution or something that was going to be voted on, and she got floor time because she was a community board member, as opposed to being invited to speak on behalf of the organization, then I think she's exploiting her position. And it's not just about self-interest. I don't know what it's called, but that seems plainly wrong to me. However, the other case is more like what happened. What happens if a community board member, as you said, and is this in this instance, an issue comes to the community board, and this community board member either has the best information in the world about the situation. It's not that no one else can speak, but no one can has command of the thing the same way. Can this community board member essentially recuse from anything having to do, forget about the Ds, like it's really a fourth D, don't show up. At least don't show up as a member of the community board. And then when the board, either in committee or however, in full board, I don't know, it doesn't normally happen that way, actually wants a representative to speak, she speaks, makes it very clear, just like when people write an op-ed, they say, I don't speak for my employer. I'm a member of city of New York or something. It would seem to me that she should be able to do that in that situation. And further, if it was a situation in which another community board member owned a business that was trying to rent space or did rent space at the Armory, and they had a dispute over the rental terms or the payment or something like that, and that came up, would COIB have treated that person the same way if that person was at the board meeting and said, look, I'm directly involved in the dispute that's sort of giving rise to this. I'm not going to participate as a board member, but I want my voice to be heard. And you can imagine land use situations, this might happen all the time. Somebody wants to put a patio in the backyard. And that's not like becoming a member of the community board when you already are the Armory executive director. You commented earlier, that was like a little weird. And I can see that. On the other hand, very often people are encouraged to be members of the community board when they have a stake in the community. They don't have to live there. Maybe they work there. Anyway, I'm sorry to talk so long, but if a person in a land use situation is putting in a patio, they didn't predict that when they got elected to the community, appointed to the community board, and they appear in committee, they have to appear before land use. I suppose they could have a representative, but they can also attend. Are they not to speak? Should they be very clear about it? Or are they not to come? And the same thing would happen at the board meeting. If it was their issue, voted on as a separate resolution, what do they do?
Okay, great question. Great question. Okay, there's a lot there, and let me see if I can kind of consolidate it so we have less. I'm gonna lean back on something that I said before because I think it just is so important in this very peculiar instant case that the individual in question, they're within the tasks and standards of their employment is representing their organization before Community Board 12. Now, one might argue, this person admitted this was a violation, but maybe defense counsel takes up, they want to be a little risky, and they say the first thing that happened on that list where the community board member who also works for the Armory Foundation, I think that they were actually just speaking as a community board member. And if you can, if she says, yes, that's what I was doing, maybe you got a case, maybe, but that's not what happened. That is not what happened. Like, she admitted that she was speaking on behalf of the organization, right? But the other things where, because again, like, certainly it's very advantageous for the Armory to send this person, who's also a community board member, to be the representative who tries to convince the community board that they're doing everything A-okay and by the book. And you can imagine from a public's perspective, like, that feels weird. That's got a perception that the Armory Foundation, and I don't want to comment on this particular individual because it's just the facts that are in the disposition. So I'll make it more hypothetical. But like, if my employer would love to have me go do this thing because that's how they feel, they want to minimize risk and they want to maximize the positive outcome. But to any member of the public, it feels weird that this one organization that's got a community board member who also works for that organization. It feels like they're getting a bit of an in. Again, it's not because the standard that's being woven in there is that they're like, here's another example. We even say it's so important for the advocacy thing to not be hijacked that, like, let's say we're dealing with Marty's favorite organization, which is the Department of Transportation, right? If you have a Department of Transportation employee who is serving on your committee, and let's say the Department of Transportation now wants to send an employee out to make a presentation to your community board, it can't be that community board person. Even if DOT thought that would be a great idea and like, hey, you're going to be there anyway, can you just do a couple of slides? No, that DOT person who's there, they are only there in their community board capacity, which is why they can't vote on anything related to DOT. Here, the line was crossed because there were ways in which this individual was serving their own organization much more, solely in comparison with their community board function. One could maybe argue, and I don't know all the facts because I only saw what's in the final disposition. Maybe the first, that's why I said like the first one, you're like, wow, you get 1,500 for that. Maybe not, it's probably less, but even there, I think that the feeling that she agreed to and that the board thought was that even the initial conversation had crossed a line, and part of that was the coloring of the conversation, what color the participation took in the discussion. So,
I just want to, just as a follow-up, and I know you didn't respond to the land use thing yet, or maybe there's no time for that.
no, you know what? Go ahead, bring it up again, because I didn't mean to not do it. So
no,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that what's counterintuitive about the way this played out is that she actually was worse off because she said, I'm speaking for the Armory, and I have the facts, and I'm the executive director, and I'm speaking for the Armory. She actually did worse under this scenario. I understand why it was no good what she did, but she actually would have been better off if she acted in a somewhat less forward and somewhat more surreptitious manner if she never identified the hat she was wearing, even if people knew, and she just started to talk in favor of the Armory. And I mean, that would be worse to me.
So a couple of factual things. One, this person, not that this is super important to your point, but just in the coloring of it, this person wasn't the executive director, but she was some kind of her title was some kind of community liaison. So her job was to be the interface between the Armory Foundation, CB12, and some other government organizations. I take your point. Although one counterpoint would be to say like, well, it was her employer. So she had to do the disclosure in any case. But I think what locks up the case for me is when her employer says, we're going to do our official presentation tomorrow. I'm not coming because that's what you wanted. Instead, I'm sending your community board member to advocate on behalf of us. That's definitely, when that person did that, they are absolutely, there's unquestionably serving in this advocacy role for their employer. And that's something that
there probably should be a bright line rule about that, because in that situation, that person should be somehow I used the word recused before, disqualified, because if she didn't do what you said, which for you is the bright line, if she didn't act in her armory capacity while in the community board meeting room, what should she have done in this process? You know what her job was, you know what her position was in terms of the armory, but she's also a member of the community board. What should she have done in this whole discussion in the committee and in the board in order to be okay?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. And again, I don't want to be too hard on this person. They paid their fine. They had the public disposition. So let's talk sort of in ideal
Or treat
models.
her as a hypothetical. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter. It's a
yeah.
good.
Let's kind of be forward thinking about this. If I wanted to stay on the right side of the line, there's probably two things I'd keep in mind. One is that because I am never going to be able to attend the community board meeting on behalf of my employer has got to be clear with me on that point, right? Because I've got to let them know, like, hey, if you assign me work where you want me to go out and do the presentation, I'm going to violate Charter Section 2604B6. I'm going to be making a compensated appearance before the city agency that I serve. That's a violation, you know? So I would let my employer know that. I also then, if I'm a person who's the kind of community liaison person, I think probably that means there's got to be a recusal. Like I should never be ever contacting the community board where I work or serve on behalf of my employer, because I'm going to run into the same problem. So we're talking about a full recusal there. On the other side, I would also make sure, and again, we're speaking in hypotheticals here. One, we're already going to do this with the discussion. Hey, that's my employer, the blah, blah, blah. And right now I'm speaking in my personal capacity. And the last thing I would do is I would always make sure that when I'm at a community board meeting, I'm not clocked in somewhere else, because, you know, I would hate for anybody to be in a situation where they're tracking hours for some reason at this organization, you know, where I'm not supposed to be there in that capacity, and yet I'm on the clock in that capacity, right? Or at least I'm on the clock when I'm at the community board. I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, but I'm just saying there should be, through all appearances and any paper trail, clearly I'm serving in my private capacity.
Alex?
Go ahead.
Alex, I sent you this afternoon not a hypothetical, a real thing concerning Board 8, and I'd like to repeat it now and get your opinion on it.
Yeah.
Because the advice I gave, I want to make sure is on solid ground. A member of this board who works for the College of Mount St. Vincent is concerned because my friends at DOT want to change the street structure on Riverdale Avenue.
Okay.
At this moment, he's not quite sure what his opinion is, but being an employee for Mount St. Vincent, he's concerned that because I've raised this issue about representing rather than discussing, he doesn't want to cross that line. So that's question number one. And question number two, if he's not representing, which obviously he's not, does he need to triple D?
Okay.
Because he's employed.
DOT's proposers, number of traffic lanes in Riverdale Avenue. This is the access to the College of St. Vincent, which he is employed, fearing the crossing along with. Okay, so good question. Okay, so just to tie up the sort of messiness of the issue. And by the way, Stephen, I thank you for your question. And before Marty, let me just stick a pin in this just for 1 second. Stephen, did we do enough on land use, or do we need to go a little bit more?
I think the land use situation is the same as the bar owner.
Okay.
Who happens to be a member of the community board, and even the Mount St. Vincent person is actually encouraged to join the community board, like the head of a nonprofit that's based in Riverdale. That's a person I remember on the health committee. We wanted the person who was in charge of that, and then they were a community committee member, and then they didn't become a full member. But anyway, I'm a little curious about that, even though one person is commercially being paid, the bar owner in theory, And the person who's putting the patio in the backyard, not being paid, but it's not only self-interest, it's like, rubber's hitting the road. They either get the patio or they don't.
Yeah, okay. So here's my understanding of that is let's do the backyard thing on the property owner, right? So obviously we're doing 3Ds there, right? So we're doing, hey, that's my property. I know you guys are voting on this thing tonight. This is why, if I could vote, I would vote this way, or why I think you should vote this way, or whatever you want to say. Here's the context, here's the background, etc. And then I do not vote. That's pretty clear. Because I'm participating there as a community board member. Now, Stephen, you're right to sort of heighten the distinctions about the committee meetings. Here's my point. Let's say I'm not on that committee that is going to hear zoning variance issues. I don't have any truck with them. I'm never there. But that committee now, in order to make it, is now tasked with a determination on my land use issue, right? That committee, there's no way that I can participate at that committee meeting as a community board member because I'm not on the committee. And in that case, someone that is going to have to do that representing for me. That cannot be me who does that representing. And you can understand there, out of the level of fairness, why that is, because it's weird for the community board member to basically hey, I've just got my homeowner hat on now, right? And I'm representing myself.
I think it's a very tough one. I think it's a tough one.
You know what, Stephen? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a step back on that particular issue because while I'm 90% sure that my answer is correct, I'm like, I just thought of something where, you know what, I need to do a little more research first. So here's what I'm going to do. I want to table the land use issue. Tomorrow, what I'm going to do, I'm going to consult with my confreres a little bit, bounce off a couple of hypotheticals, and I'll paint a couple of hypotheticals, at least one on one side, one on the other side, to put up some clear guardrails. And that way we can stop talking about it here and I'll give you some clear answers. Okay. Because I don't want to take up any more time of people, but I also don't want to disrespect anybody's concern on this issue. Let me move to the last issue. Again, I'm not going to comment on anybody specifically because the person who needs the advice is the person who's actually got the conflict. So let me speak in generalities here. The question that we're asking here is, DOT is going to do a big thing. It's not a thing targeted to my employer. There is going to be an effect on my employer because the driveway of my employer is around the place that DOT is going to be working. But DOT is not doing it for us. And DOT's effect is not going to be just on us. It's going to be on a lot of places. The more it's a lot of places and not just my driveway of my employer, the less of a need there is for the 3Ds. And that's been borne out by several advisory opinions over the years where people ask the following question, like in Queens, where there was a really big up zoning or a down zoning, whatever, it doesn't matter. But people ask, well, I'm a community board member. I own an apartment in this place where there's going to be like 100 blocks of rezoning. Can I vote on that thing? I might have an interest in that. And the answer is the effect on your one property is not disqualifying enough for you to have to use the 3Ds. So if the DOT thing is about the driveway of my employer, we're talking about maybe an issue where, the employer's got a real opinion about that. And I got to use the 3Ds. But the larger the project is, and the more that my employer is only one out of many hundreds of entities that may be affected by it, the less of a status, which means I don't really know from the facts represented in what was talked about in the email today, if the 3Ds are warranted or not. But just to identify one other thing about whether or not someone could, let's say if someone did have to use the 3Ds, would they be in any danger like our friend in the case from the Armory? And the answer is no. If I work for a medical center, I'm probably a medical professional of some sort. The only person at the medical center who's going to get a problem like our friend at the CB12 had is the person whose job it is to interface directly with Community Board 8 on these issues, right? That's a public relations person or a community liaison person or whatever. So if I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I'm an administrator, I'm a not-for-profit development manager, I'm an engineer, I'm an architect, I'm a whatever. Those people are not paid liaisons to the community board. So they're going to come into the thing. If it turns out the DOT project is really only affecting the place where I work, I'm going to say, yeah, look, that's where I work. They have opinions on this thing. I'll tell you what my opinion is. And whether or not it's good for the community. Some of it I agree with my employer, some of it I don't. Whatever I say, doesn't matter, because I've disclosed, and now I don't vote on the thing. So if the bottom line for the person in question, Marty, is if they've got a concern that there's a really big outsized effect on this thing on their employer, and especially if it's not affecting anybody else, they should call us for advice and find out if this is something that they have to refrain from voting on. But find out, because in general, you, like everybody else, we want people to be able to participate in votes whenever they can, and we don't want them to preemptively remove themselves from voting if they don't have to, right?
Okay, I'm gonna call on the two people who raised their hands, but
Please
you
do.
just touched on something which I want to question. You said someone who's not on the committee doesn't speak at a committee meeting. That's not our case. We invite the public to speak.
Yes, we invite the public to speak, right? But for the analysis of the enforcement case that we've been talking about, it is true that the public comes to speak, right? But this particular individual was assigned work by her employer to come represent the employer. So it's not like somebody, she came down and said, I don't, my bosses don't even know I'm here, but I got some opinions about what should happen in here. It's like, we at the thing, this is what we want. This is how you must understand. This is what my bosses think you need to know. And that's what puts that particular individual over the line. There's
All
no
right, thank you.
community board function for her there at that committee because she wasn't on that committee. That's my point. Does that make sense?
David?
Yes, thank you, Marty. Alex, going back to the example you did at the beginning about DOT, let's assume a community board member does work for DOT.
Yep.
And this person is the only engineer who specializes in geology and topography.
Okay.
And and that's rather specialized. And we need help because we don't want another Deegan Expressway flooding. And
Okay.
this is the only person who knows this stuff.
Okay. The restriction, the 3D restriction was ideally made for exactly this kind of person. This is the kind of person that you want on the transportation committee. It's not the kind of person who probably can lead the transportation committee because they're going to have to use the 3Ds all the time. But you can definitely put them on the transportation committee. The assumption is whenever a DOT issue comes up, they are going to disclose they work for DOT. They are then going to provide all of that valuable expertise to your committee and to the community board, and then they will refrain from voting. They do not vote. Now, again, remember, the only time some hypothetical geologist or engineer is going to have a problem is if what their boss at their agency says, hey, you know what you're doing tonight? Don't clock out. Because you're going to go to that community board, you're still going to be clocked in for DOT, and I want you to make a presentation about the Major Deegan because this is what the commissioner thinks that these people should do and what they're not getting right. That person should not be making that sort of representation because now they're representing as a DOT employee. All the other things that happen, the contribution of the expertise, like, hey, I'm a community board member. I happen to work there. That's why I disclosed. They provide all the expertise. You got no problem whatsoever. It's clean. It should never, look, you can always ask that question, but the answer is always going to be the same. Yes, you can participate in those discussions when it's like that.
I'm sorry, I meant that they're the one making the presentation.
So the question is, who asked them to make the presentation? Are they making the presentation because you asked for it? Or are they making the presentation because you asked DOT for it and DOT assigned them to do it.
The latter.
Okay, so if it's the latter, it probably should not be that person. It should not be that government employee. DOT should have somebody else do that thing. Now, look, hard cases make for bad law. If it really is there are people like this in the city. I'm not one of them, but there are people who have that kind of expertise that nobody else has. And if that is the case, that person should get legal advice and see, like, maybe there is a public service interest from DOT and from the community board to have this particular thing done in this way, where 99 times out of 100, it shouldn't be, but there's good, compelling reasons in this particular instance to do that. Maybe that's true. So have that person write us for advice, and let's find out if that's the case, because certainly the board has been reasonable in those instances. But that would be an exceptional case. It's never say never, but that's why we're here, is to find out if that should be that restriction should be waived in that instance, right? So you can always ask for that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yep. I
Lisa?
got it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, hey, Alex, thanks for clarifying the co-op owner situation, because I'm right on Riverdale Avenue. So I guess that's a 2D, not a 3D, because sort of like the person up at Mount St. Vincent. But on the board, we have lots of community-minded people who are on different civic organizations, perhaps unpaid board on the board of those organizations. And do they disclose? Do they have to refrain from voting if there's an issue that they voted on in the civic organization, and then it comes before the board as well?
Okay, so the answer to that a little bit is, how do we define civic organization? And that's one. And then the second one is, what's the issue and what's the issue's impact directly to the civic organization in question. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say we're talking about a not-for-profit.
Mhm.
Now, not-for-profits, when you serve on the board of a not-for-profit, you are definitely under the law associated with that not-for-profit, because you have a duty of loyalty, duty of care. Under state law, you're a fiduciary, right? You've got responsibilities to the not-for-profit. So the law treats that essentially as if it was an employer. So, for example, if an issue, let's say you worked for a big not-for-profit like a Bronx museum, right? And that museum was asking for a zoning variance that was specific to construction that it was undertaking. Because you were on the board of the not-for-profit of the Bronx Museum, you would say, I'm disclosing I'm on the board. I'm now free to participate in the discussions as a community board member, relevant to whatever we're talking about here, my own opinions, the history, the backstory, the whatever. I'm participating as a community board member. And then I do not vote on that issue because I am associated with that not-for-profit. Now let's take another issue. Let's say it was a Bronx art museum that I was on the board of. Now there's an issue, and let's say that my Bronx Art Museum loves art for kids, right? We got all kinds of art programs for kids, blah, blah, blah. Now let's say, and we're always advocating for that at the not-for-profit at the Bronx Art Museum. Now let's say the community board takes up a resolution where they're going to ask DOE, or Department of Cultural Affairs to provide more money for after-school programs for the arts in the community board district. Just because my not-for-profit that I'm on the board of likes that idea does not trigger me using the 3Ds. Where it would trigger me using the 3Ds is if the community board says, let's get more funding to the Bronx Museum so that they can do the thing. Now I've got to disclose, discuss, don't vote. Because that's about a real thing. We're asking for real money to come to the place. It's not an issue we think is cool or one that we feel is in under the aegis of our mission. It's one that directly affects the museum where I sit on the board. Then you've got to use the 3D. So And then other kinds of civic organizations, whether we're talking about like a business improvement district or a local development corporation, anybody who's on those and wants to figure out if they've got to use the 3Ds or not, give us a ring on legal advice, because the devil's in the details about sort of the bylaws and how they're constituted. You may have an issue depending on what your relationship is with a business improvement district, and depending on what you're doing there, you may have an issue, you may not. So just write in and talk to us about those kinds of things.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Got a couple more questions. Stephen, you want to go? I see you at the top there on my.
I just wanted to ask on the last one, what about I mean, I think I know the answer, but an organization like an environmental group that exists just to sort of, they don't have one particular focus other than geographic, but they're pro-environment, and you're on the board, or you're the vice president, or you're a dues paying supporter. My guess is that whatever the legislation is, whatever the issue is, it's not affecting the pocketbook or the headquarters or anything. So they're just people with a view, and they have.
That's right.
So board member wouldn't even matter.
Yeah, it wouldn't even matter in that case, because unless there's an issue, as you've articulated, that directly, financially or otherwise affects the nonprofit. Again, we're talking about like funding, grants, zoning, real estate, whatever. Then they're just people. There's not an issue going directly to the organization, so you don't have to disclose, don't have to discuss, don't have to refrain from voting. It's exactly what you said. This is exactly what you said.
I just want
David,
really very
close it up.
wanted to say that, not for an answer from you, but just when you're going to go think about that other distinction, I think that it's very easy when the organization is very large and there's a PR person or a government relations person, or even a person who goes out and gets money, and they're not supposed to go to the community board if they're members. I get that. It's easy to make distinctions and not have them go. But the community board's classic cases are the bar owner, the pizza, who wants the approval of the committee, and the person who wants the patio. And they don't have staff. They don't have a person they can send from the family who's in charge of public relations. They own the property. They live alone. The bar owner runs it himself. I think that gets very difficult because it's not a hospital with a doctor on the board and a separate community relations department. I think it's a small person.
I think that's right there. It does present difficulties for the small business owner. Now, the question then comes down to, do those difficulties, how has the board come out in thinking about what's more important there, like maintaining sort of the same standard of integrity for the voting and appearances before the community board, or do they try to carve out a little guy exception? I've worked for the board a long time, and I even think I remember one enforcement case that was about a bar owner who needed advocacy before a committee because there was a problem. And I believe that bar owner got stung on a violation that he admitted to because he represented himself before that committee. But I'm going to make all that stuff clear tomorrow, just because I don't want to be either too restrictive or permissive and give people a false sense. So let me stick a pin in that, and I'll give you a more fulsome examination of that particular issue tomorrow, Stephen.
Thanks
Okay.
for your patience. Yep.
I'm going to be a lousy host and say I need to get back to my agenda.
Yeah, it's fine.
David, is there an important thing you haven't raised
Yeah,
already?
it's actually, he brought up something that's quite timely. Alex, I chair the budget committee, and we are in the throat of the 2024 budget process, where from the dozen various committees that we have somewhere on the order of 50 or 60 capital and expense budget items that we are going to try to prioritize and vote on. Now, where does this individual who works for the example you gave before, who works for some sort of agency, not-for-profit on their board, and they want to get a grant, they want to ask the XYZ city agency to support a certain program in our district, and this individual wants to make it priority 1 for the committee, and then priority 3 for all of Community Board 8.
That's a really good question. So if I understand correctly, David, let me just summarize here. So
And let me complicate it a little bit more. The chairs have even more weight in that process because the chairs of each committee go into a negotiation process to say that education should be 2 and 5 and transportation should be 1 and 4, blah, blah, blah. If that individual is a chair, does it complicate it even more? Should they recuse themselves from any discussion about this particular request?
Okay, so in principle, the way the conflicts of interest law has laid out these things is not sort of general big fields of inquiry where, I'll give you an example. So let's say I work for a not-for-profit arts organization, which I've done before. And I also, that's when I paid $300 a month in rent because that's what I could afford. But let's say I worked for a not-for-profit arts organization. It's too attenuated a link for me to say, well, I think arts should be top of the list because we don't even know if my organization's ever going to get any money out of it. Does that make sense? Like
Yes.
the thing that what the conflicts of interest law has been fairly consistent on this is that I've got to enact this recusal with the disclosure, discuss, don't vote when there's a direct thing that's actually happening to the interest that I'm associated with. So I don't think that you're going to have an issue there unless, let's say I work for this huge organization that's like the only game in town on the agenda item, and I'm asking for the agenda item to be moved up, but everybody knows that that entire class of stuff, we're only talking about one organization. Well, then, de facto, we've got an issue there, but that's not the way you articulated it. So, all facts can be different, but I think in general, unless it was that, just the class of activity is a little too broad for us to consider in that
Right.
context.
All right, Camilla?
Alex, all this is super fascinating, and just thank you so much, and thanks Martin for having him here. I know there's not too much time, but just wanted to reassert the importance of what Steve Fruit called for, and I think Lisa also mentioned it. I mean, from a land use perspective, we definitely need sort of more clarifications, I would say. There are issues that are profoundly controversial. And, we often say as board members, I live on such street, DOT wants to delineate differently. I'm worried that will be a disaster and it will affect prices on my building or whatever. Or the opposite, DSS wants to put a shelter and the whole neighborhood prices will go down or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's reasonable sort of to ask people to do disclosure as if, I live in the house next door to the shelter or whatever. But I also don't know sort of what's the fair way to vote, even as a board member or as a land use member, on issues that are at that level of like intensity. And you see what I'm saying? So I don't know. What I'm saying is that I do think we need more guidance on land use, what Steve called for. So whatever you can do in writing or come back to us soon, it would be much appreciated.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. And fortunately, I'm just looking up right now, and Marty, I'm going to give this back to you in a second here. There's actually a new community board rule that summarizes a lot of what the board had said over the years about these kinds of issues. And I'm going to go back and look at and see if they've provided any clarity on essentially, Carmelia, what you're asking about is the scope problem, right? We know that if it's an issue, like if the city wants to take my house and build a shelter out of it, of course I'm going to use the 3Ds because they're talking about my house, right? Let's say they're going to build a shelter a block away or 5 blocks away.
Yes,
well, one might argue that there could be some economic, and certainly people will argue left or right.
They will, and they did, yes.
So, but again, the larger number of properties that potentially are affected by an issue that's not targeted at you as a homeowner to begin with, the more likely it is that the 3Ds are unnecessary because it's not it's not an action that concerns you specifically, and you've got a small role to play on it, right? I'm not going to look this stuff up right now. I was like, oh, can I get the answer? But it's going to take me too long. So that's a second issue in addition to Stevens that I will look up and have kind of better hypotheticals, like this is a definite no problem, this is definitely a problem, and then the gray area somewhere in between. That way, at least you guys see where the board kind of thinks about these things, okay?
Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Alex, as I said when you first began, you've been there before, and you've been a font of information, and you obviously were spellbinding tonight. So I thank you and look forward to hearing from you. And very shortly, we'll be inviting you back.
Okay, well, thanks, friends. I won't take up any more of your time. It's my pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure because you guys have such really good questions. And Marty, I'll be in touch with you shortly, okay?
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay,
Al.
bye, everybody.
I,
Bye. Okay, here's where I want to go now.
So what was the ethical times puzzle?
It was a Wordle thing. You do Wordle? You play that game?
Yeah, I do, but okay.
I've forgotten what the word was, but it could have been civics or something,
I mean,
something
it was
obvious.
coincidentally an answer?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Well, if you do Wordle, you have to figure out what the word is. But I'm wasting time now. I'd be glad to take you on a tour later of Wordle. I want to do one quick thing, I hope, and then go to what I hope is the main purpose of our discussion tonight. There was an event that took place at last Wednesday's community board meeting, executive committee meeting. And the issue at the committee, and most of you were there, but for the sake of those who were not, the issue came up that a committee voted on a resolution, but the resolution as stated was a yes or no response rather than a written document which says whereas, therefore. And so the question became, the chair submitted for consideration to the executive committee basically one sentence resolution. It was felt by at least one member, and I think more than that, at least one member of the executive committee who felt that after 3 hours, whatever, of the committee's meeting, in which many local people spoke and strong opinions were raised, that the resolution did not do justice to the event and to the people who spoke. And so the request was made of the chair, who was absent, by the way, a request made to the chair that the resolution be modified so that whereas be added. There was an attack, I'll use that word advisedly, there was an attack on this whole premise that once the resolution, whatever form it's in, leaves the committee to the point that the community board votes on it, nothing can be changed. Even though the history of the board has been, I use wordsmanship because it'll be used again later, and that is the obligation or the authority of the chair is to work out the resolution, specifically if no written document has been approved. And so the questions was, if they're going to change a sentence, a paragraph, an iota, and add whereases, a public meeting has to take place all over again so the public can see that operation. To those who were there, have I represented it properly so far?
No.
Yes.
Or what did I leave out?
So at the issue at executive committee meeting wasn't whether or not a resolution can be changed between exec or a committee meeting and a board meeting. The issue came up was when it was suggested that the chair of the committee contact members of the committee individually and
Okay.
ask the individual committee members for their specific changes to the resolution to come back and change the draft present before the board meeting. And what was suggested, I'm sorry, Marty, what was suggested at the meeting was there's no issue in a chair of a committee to ask members of the committee or even members of the board, which is probably the better way to do it, for suggestions on the resolution or possible changes to the resolution. The issue was going one step further and having deliberations to change the resolution before the meeting. And that was the issue.
I'm not sure how you define deliberation, but I'll come back to that. So the question is whether or not whatever machinations could take place tomorrow night on a resolution to add things, divide things, cross out things. The fear was, and I support the fear, I don't necessarily support that it had more whereases, but the fear was that the debate would go on forever rather than in past where a resolution was brought forward. If you want to amend it, amend it. And so that was the issue. Did I miss something here? Oh, come on, I'm missing something. Oh, there it is. No. It was sent to me, which it had been also in September and October, where a very similar situation took place. It was sent to me that the COOG, the Committee on Open Government, sends out, when necessary, an advisory opinion. And this was advisory opinion 3732. And it was highlighted in yellow when it was submitted. I've underlined it and bolded. The question, however, a series of communications between individual members or telephone calls among the members which results in a collective decision, a meeting held by means of a telephone conference or a series of telephone calls, or a vote taken by mail or email, would, in my opinion, be inconsistent with law. Written then by Robert Freeman, who is the head of the conflict of the Committee on Open Government. Now, the part that's underlined and bolded makes perfect sense, except that I look at that first sentence, and the first sentence caused me all kinds of questioning. There is nothing in the open meetings law that would preclude members of a public body from conferring individually by telephone, via mail, or email. So not to be totally at risk of making an opinion based on a single sentence, I sent a full-page letter to the conflict of interest, keep doing that, to the Committee on Open Government, in which I try to relay everything I've just discussed. And then right in the middle here, I put the exact same paragraph I just read to you.
But
So
Marty,
at the heart of the discussion is a question of wordsmithing. That is, after resolution is passed, in principle, at the committee level, are there limits to both wording or further elaboration limited under OML? One board member referenced AO 372 as the authority that says wordmanship is not allowed. However, in the same COIB opinion, I screwed that one up. In the next COG opinion, Robert Freeman said there is nothing in the open meetings law that would preclude members of the public body from conferring. I'm going to leave it right there at the moment. Everyone on the board is going to get copies of these three items tomorrow. The third item being the response that I received.
But
And-
Marty, and I'm just briefly reading what you have there. Obviously, it's the first time I'm seeing it. I don't
Obviously,
think
because nobody
that's
else
the-
has.
Yeah, so I don't think that's the question that was presented, though. You know, it's not an issue of whether or not wordsmithing, or changing, making changes or amendments to a resolution, we do that all the time. The issue is reaching a collective decision between a series of communications outside of the public if there is a majority of members, because we get into the meeting issue.
The issue is not to change the intent of the resolution that was affirmatively approved by the committee.
But
The
Marty,
issue
that's not the
here, and
issue.
it is for me. And if you look at the last sentence, please do, the advisory opinion you cite remains the opinion of the committee and practically means that while members can confer about change to the language of a resolution outside of an open meeting, any formal changes a body is empowered to make to the resolution would have to occur and be voted upon in an open meeting. Therefore, what you have to me is two ends of the process. Process number one, the committee comes to a decision that they feel in a particular way. And item number two is at the open meeting of the community board, the resolution, which may have gone through a process of change in terms of wording, wordsmithing, not changing the intent of the committee, comes before the full board. So the impression that no conversation can take place, that a public meeting is required for a chair to talk to one or any, except if they establish a quorum, and there must be a public meeting. But the chair can ask as many people for their opinion as possible as the wording is developed. To me, that's the answer I understand it to be, and the recommendation that I will share tomorrow night's meeting.
But Marty, it's not the question that was asked. And again, that's the issue. It's not the question presented here.
Sorry you feel that way. The issue is we have done this for 100 years. And as I say, this came up September, October. I was going to listen to the tape because I know I said exactly the same stuff, public meeting way back when, but somehow my request was not responded to by the community board's office this morning, because I sent it over the weekend, hoping to be able to listen to exactly what was said then or was reported out then. So the question before us, as far as I am concerned, and I do want to move on, is that the resolution that we brought to the board tomorrow night will represent and not have to be seconded, because it's the resolution of the committee will be brought before the board tomorrow night.
But Marty, just as a point of information, and I don't know if you saw it, but there was a completely different resolution today.
Yes. I didn't read the whole thing. I just saw it.
And I don't know if that was something that Deb had done, as an amended thing that she was going to present it, or what the process behind it was.
The committee members, as I said 4 months ago, months ago, is that if the item brought before the board is not representative of the committee, then any member of the committee can stand up and say, that's not what we had in mind. That was not the resolution passed. Other than that, it's the committee's resolution that she's bringing forward.
Marty, I was at that TNT meeting, and I remember that after all of the 155 odd people spoke, Deb had said that she was not prepared with a resolution, but that she would put one together and that would be the premise. And lo and behold, that was what was circulated as the resolution. The feeling, I
Resolution.
think, what?
I was there also. The resolution was made by Ed. Ed said we should vote no, and he didn't elaborate.
I think we're talking about two different meetings. I think Sylvia's talking about October and Marty is talking about last week.
I'm talking about the 155 people who signed in and were participating, or it was screens that signed in at the last TNT meeting concerning the Riverdale Avenue issue.
Yes. If I may, I was at the meeting both of those meetings, frankly. The thing, I want to address one thing. When you would use the term wordsmith, to me, wordsmithing is grammatical, a versus many, things like that, or even our land use thing last week about whether the 50 precinct is the side door or the rear door. That's wordsmithing. What happened last week was a 1-paragraph whereas that Deb summarized based on her recollection of the people who did speak. Out of 150 people who signed in, only about 20 or 30 spoke. What came up this weekend was 9 whereas clauses. And to me, that's a material difference. Where does one draw the line? 2 whereas, 3 whereas? I'm not going to get into that. But I do think that it is a material difference. And where that fits in under the OML is one thing. But I think where Dan was leading, and I think we should pursue that ideas. What do we want to do? I mean, we're talking about our ethics, our procedures. I think that we should have our rules of, we'll allow for a little bit of wordsmithing, but if there's a material change to the language, it should go back to the committee. Because in spirit, I agree with Dan. It is violating the open meeting law. And whether Mr. Friedman agrees with it, I don't know, but I believe clearly in spirit there's a violation there. Another thing to keep in mind is what is the ultimate import of resolution with DOT? Well, we all have our doubts about that, but I think we really do need to consider what is wordsmithing and what is, material changes in what could be a smoke-filled room. I don't think it is in this case, but I mean, that's the kind of thing that OML, I think, is intended to address. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Dan?
The
I'd say
change
so.
of side door to rear door is not wordsmithing. That's correcting. That's different. The issue
Okay.
here is wordsmithing is how do I put that in writing? And apparently Deb did not put it in writing. She just took an easy way out, quite frankly. But I know people have opinions on the issue itself, except it was voted by the committee and the committee passed a resolution. That's the bottom line.
The
And the
committee passed a
wordsmithing is
resolution
adding the
with
adding the
one
whereases.
vague whereas. And what came out this weekend was 9 whereas clauses, which really weren't all discussed, aren't really correct.
Well, again, I didn't read it. I will read it
I did.
before tomorrow night. But the question to me and the answer I received is that communication between and among board committee members, board members, between the 2 important meetings is permissible. That's what I got out of this. And you
So-
will get copies tomorrow.
But Marty, that's not necessarily, and I'm sorry, I see other people have hands up. I'm just, that's not the question though. And that's what I keep coming back to. It's not the question.
It is, Lisa.
Yeah, it's a little bit off, but the only resolution I got was today was the one from Marshallou Avenue, not Riverdale Avenue. So, did anyone actually get a new resolution?
Yes,
from-
they sent the second one out.
Oh, I didn't get it. Dan, would you mind forwarding it to me?
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lisa, there was something on Marshallou Avenue today?
Yeah, the one I got today had a Marshallou Avenue attachment, not from 2021, not the Riverdale Avenue attachment.
Oh, so that was a clerical error, you mean?
Yeah, I think it was a clerical
Oh,
error.
okay.
But
Okay.
if I was the only, I don't know, if it sounded like, Dan, you said it was a corrected one?
Yep,
Oh, okay.
yep, they sent out a second.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm gonna call Camelia, then I'm gonna move the agenda.
Thank you, Marty. Oh, sorry. Did I? Okay, yeah. Just to say, actually, I went at both meetings, the TNT and exec, and actually I went back to TNT to re-listen for the first like hour and a half because I had things that I wanted to note. And first of all, let me just say, Deborah was super clear in the way she raised it. It was raised in the proposal of Ed, and she clearly asked, are you sure this is exactly what you want in these simple terms? And this is what the committee voted. My issue, I'm fully in agreement with everything both Dan and David said. I think there are ethical principles there, which we are kind of dancing around. I mean, I'm sorry, but the place where each committee reports is the full board. That's where resolutions that passed in committee come to the full board. Why is exec trying to act as some sort of a filter, as an add-on, as a nothing? A committee passes, it's not like a group of 10 because they are called exec, they get to process that further. No, a resolution comes in a committee, gets voted on, and then comes to full board for discussion. If you want to add 29 whereases, be my guest, but in full board, not in an in-between. Look, proof right here, Lisa, a former secretary of the board, let's assume she would be secretary, right now, she doesn't know what we are talking about 9 other whereas. This is inappropriate and is one of the many things that we've been doing for a while, which is wrong. David is correct. Wordsmithing, maybe it's a couple of words here and there, but if you had a page and a half, probably is not exactly wordsmithing and is improper procedure. Committee, full board. You could have a situation where 10 people in exec are against something, but in 40 people in full board, the resolution passes if the 10 in exec oppose, but everybody else is for. So proper procedure, I fully agree with Dan, with David, also with what Robert Fanuzzi said, because I think he was the one raising it. We got to be more careful with these things. So we're voting tomorrow, I guess, on, I don't know on what, but just wanted to make that point regarding exec, which is not a second filtering entity.
And one follow-up, Camelia, and thank you for that. I mean, I sort of agree, but there is a role for the executive committee when it comes to resolutions, and it shouldn't be like we should skip the executive committee.
No,
on it.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's not a second in-between filter. It's full committee. The full committee reports to full board. Exec may be against if they want to. Yeah.
Board, but it's a sounding board, so you can raise these issues that will come up. It's
Definitely, but it's still on the chair of the
Yeah.
committee to make the call. And the chair of the committee, it happened that she wasn't on exec. Maybe she would have been amenable on that, but it's her call onto what resolution to put forward end of the day. And exec shouldn't be a filter, a stop, an edit
That
organization.
resolution
That's
did
right.
not come from the executive committee. Know
Right.
that.
And they shouldn't. Great.
It didn't. So don't accuse it. It wasn't a
no, I'm
committee of
just-
10.
yeah.
It didn't
If I
come
may-
from.
If I may,
Policy and practice has been,
Mhm.
every committee brings before the executive committee the resolutions they choose to bring forward. The executive committee in the past has told chairs, good resolution, bring it forward. Bad resolution needs wordsmithing. Terrible resolution, bring it back to your committee. This is
Yeah,
what
but
we've always done.
But it's the chair's call what to do. They have a vote
It's
of
the
their
chair's-
committee.
But wait a minute, Marty, this is an important distinction. The executive committee is an advisor, not an editor. So the executive committee can say, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, this is not wise.
The
But
executive
that person
committee
can
does not
still
stand
bring it
in
forward.
judgment. The executive committee does not stand in judgment. What it does is say, the resolution you brought forward has some flaws in it.
Yes,
You want to think about this. It's
but
then up
that's
to
an
the chair.
advisor, not an editor.
Okay,
Exactly. Thank you for your advice, exec.
executive committee, and you were there, did not edit this. They said there's a flaw, there's something missing, and it went back to the committee, went back to the chair. Whatever forwarded from there came from the chair.
So Mark, just,
Think we'll-
well, if I may, I have a
Continue this debate
question.
Tomorrow night,
Well, I do have a question regarding just factual, and maybe you know, maybe you don't. We know, everybody was who was at that meeting knows that the committee passed basically the one sentence resolution. I don't have a problem with that. That's fine. Whatever the committee passed, they did. We know it came to exec as that same, one paragraph, one sentence, be it resolved, fine, no problem. We had a conversation. There was some disagreement about what should happen. And then today we received a much different resolution. So was that just a
Has
committee
happened in the
chair?
past.
Well, no,
Dan,
well,
No,
Marty, my
that's
question
happened in
is,
the past.
well, Marty, my question is this, is this just an amended resolution that the chair reconstructed on their own? Or was this a series of deliberations by the committee members that changed the resolution and then put something out today?
I cannot
And that's
answer
the-
that question.
Okay,
I can. What happened
know what-
was Ed wrote the 9 whereas resolution. Deb distributed to the committee members, asked for comments, and then Deb, based on whatever she received, and I do not know what she received, she presented as the resolution based on what Ed wrote, not what came out on Friday or Thursday.
it sounds like another meeting happened between exec and the board. And I'll rest there, but I think we should bring up this discussion again based upon that fact pattern.
I agree.
4 times I have, well, just a moment here. Please read the conflict of interest board dispositions. I look at the second one, and I ask you to look at that on your own. Hanky panky with a former assistant commissioner of the Department of Homeless Services, and a mere fine of $17.50 strikes me as insignificant. But just know this crap has been going on and nobody wants to deal with it.
I agree.
Okay. 4 times I tabled this. I'd like not to table it, although I'm looking at the hour and I have a plane to catch tomorrow morning. I'm assuming at this point, everyone has looked at this before tonight. I'm assuming and hoping people have opinions, and I'm open to hearing them. Well, nobody on the committee has anything to say.
We're reading.
Well, I do. If I could just talk just in general. I mean, I thought what Dan put together was spot on. And personally, I'd just like to see that printed as a resource for chairs and future chairs on our board, whether it's a standalone community reference. I mean, certainly the processes can be discussed with new chairs, but I don't know. I just think that would suffice, because Dan, I thought that was a wonderful document you put together. Anyway, and thank you for that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I thought it was very well done. Marty, I would point to number 6 under the general principles. I think this is very important and must be done very carefully. But I think it's important that a chair take measure of what's going on, what has been said, what new or not new is being said, and then decide to close the debate. So we don't have 2, 3, 4-hour meetings. And that's a tough judgment call, but I think it's important.
I sent a message out last week after the TNT meeting, because I think Deb ran an excellent meeting. And she seemed to follow all of these principles.
Yes.
The only thing I didn't include and want to add is the question of not only time limit for speakers, but the statement she made was that she'll only call on somebody once. And I want to put that in here.
But, again, one of the notes is that meetings are different. You could have a small meeting or a large public meeting. And quite frankly, I'm sure like the youth committee, aging committee, their health committee, they're small meetings. They're more a gathering place for organizations or nonprofits or, groups. I don't, so a less formal approach might be more appropriate in those situations. Whereas if you have a huge TNT issue, certainly there's some rules of civility to follow and, at all meetings, but I don't know, it's a little stifling to have something separate. We just need to keep in mind Robert's Rules of Order and, other rules that are there and other laws that are there and common decency. But I don't know. I'm sort of going back to my very original thought that do we really need to be very specifically prescriptive other than what's already in the rules or, in Robert's rules. So that's
Well,
it.
Lisa, if I may, I think number 5 sort of covers what you're talking about. And this is really principles, not rules. And frankly, I think that new chair should be introduced to this. And I'm wondering if any of these kinds of rules are in the procedure manuals that you started to develop.
Yeah, well, that's why I thought, what Dan put together can be in the procedures. You can add
Great idea.
You could add one sentence to every one of those points that Dan put together and summarize it in plain language, and I think it would be a great reference. Anyway, just my thought. So I don't know. And yeah, I brought up before in other meetings, this should not go in ethical guidance or anything else. It belongs in like the procedures for managers, for chairpersons.
Agreed.
Amelia?
Thank you. It's just a detail, but it's my latest obsession. In point 4, where you say to be provided to the public at least 24 hours prior to the meeting, actually the law is very specific in asking, again, to the extent practicable, for the records to be posted on the public body website, which all of a sudden puts a requirement on the chairs to have the resolution prepared in advance and for the office to be prepared when the full board meeting is taking place, for that to be posted on the website as part and linked to the agenda. The system we're currently using, which is for people who registered on the email list of the district manager, is not the same with the public website of the public body. And my favorite detail, which I feel like reading to you from those slides that I love so much.
Please don't read to us.
It's one sentence. This requirement has been in effect since February 12, 2012. This amendment simply places a 24-hour minimum time frame for making those records available.
Except exactly the conversation we had preceding this, is that when a resolution comes from the floor, there's no way to announce it 24 hours in advance.
That's correct. When it comes from the floor, but we are not
Okay,
have
it's
so many
practicable.
resolutions not coming. Okay.
And the word practicable comes from the law. I never used it before. I saw it in the law.
And I believe that part of the issue with the website is that I think we still don't have control over updates to the website. I think we still submit updates to do it, which I think is evolving. But I think so far we are just submitting, which takes it out of our control. And so our email thing is the only thing we can control for now. But I agree with you, it should be posted on the website ASAP.
And we should make a little effort maybe in advocating for it.
Any other comments?
Marty? Hi.
Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to put in a plug for the guidelines, the one-page guidelines, as written. I think that it's much easier to follow that sort of, prescription and list of guidance for the average person, especially a person who's not, totally versed in parliamentary procedure. I'm not saying that the research that Dan did isn't important, because you don't want to do things that are violative of our bylaws or charter. But I think that if it was up to me, I would take the guidelines draft that I know, Marty, you've introduced for the committee's consideration several times. And to the extent that there are things in there that vary or conflict with what's in Robert's rules and the like, and Robert's rules is helpful, but I don't think, I don't find that document to be as helpful to a new chair in figuring out what to do. I think it's important for every chair to read that and for every chair to be familiar with it as time goes on. But I think in terms of how people can sort of conform their conduct, it would be much easier to have this sort of one pager. And I, as I say, I think that if there's anything in there that's in conflict, it should be discussed. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in that list. And I think probably the way that you described the way that Deb ran her meeting, it sounds like it sort of was run pretty much according to that. So that's my plug.
Thank you.
Marty, at the beginning of the rules that you submitted for consideration, I had made a remark and nobody really picked up on it, but I haven't changed my mind. And that is that the community member input into a situation that it's so important to them, like the flooding on Palisade Avenue, and they have to wait until number 6 or 7 to be able to speak. I think that's very unfair. We are a community board and they should be heard before that. And I think that is an important thing that should be changed. I know this is just optional. So the committee chair can probably change the listing of the speakers, but I think that is the wrong place for it.
I agree. I mean, our comments should reflect, should take into consideration what the public says. We'll have our own personal opinions, but I agree, just courtesy to the public and to let them speak. But I'm not the chair of a committee right now. So.
Anyone else? The only suggestion I've heard so far really is Steve's, that we move forward on presenting this to the exec unless anyone has any other changes. I'm not sure. I agree with what I think I heard from Sylvia and Lisa. And these are guidelines. These are not rules. These are not mandated. And as situations arise, chairs can do as they feel is appropriate. But I don't know who you want to bump. Chair will go through the process. The chair will open the meeting. There needs to be a basis for conversation, and that's where the agency or petitioner makes their presentation. Deb immediately asked for elected officials,
So,
which I thought was interesting.
Marty, I don't think we should be singling out any particular individuals.
Mhm.
And
Elected
look, I
officials
think
were
everyone is,
asked-
I think
rather
everyone is
than-
entitled to their opinion of how chairs conduct meetings. I just don't.
We
think
already
should
said
single out
that.
individuals.
The chair can decide which order to place them. Their prerogative, it's guidelines, it's not rules. It will not be tattooed to anybody. They can do what they choose.
It was just pointing out a certain chair's actions, I think. Is
I've already said that.
So Marty, can I make a suggestion? And I can't believe I'm offering this up. But as you know, I pretty much drafted the procedures for managers. Would you like me to take a stab for our next meeting at putting these points that you put together, as well as considering the
Lisa,
tie-in?
why are you raising this now? And I brought this up 4 months ago. I have no problem with you looking at it and making comments. I want to know why you're raising them now. If I sound frustrated, it's because I am.
I just volunteered to do the work to put it in writing to add to a simple guide for managers. That's what I just said I'd do. Taking your points here and formatting it so that it fits with other procedures for managers reference.
Marty, you also got to remember that this has been delayed for months because not everybody got it, because there was a problem with the BCC copies that didn't go to all the committee members.
David, I will give you that and I will appreciate that. But I tell you, you're probably the only one that deals with it, that has that situation. If I sound frustrated, it's because I am.
No. What I'm getting at is we deferred discussion each month because I kept on
Because
saying.
you didn't get the copy.
That's
And I
right.
appreciate that.
We did defer discussion. Now we're discussing it and now Lisa is volunteering. I'm not blaming anyone.
Yeah, I think at an earlier meeting, Marty, I had suggested that, and you didn't want to decide where it should go. You wanted to get the rules down first. But now I'm suggesting that we include it in the manager's guide.
I didn't disagree with you then. I'm not disagreeing with you now. The only thing I'm hearing is silence, which is table it again.
I would take it as, let's take Lisa up on her offer. There is no rush to get this done. The ideas that you have coalesced or brought together are good ones. Now Lisa's offering to make it so that it actually could be implemented later on. And it probably would be timely in that we probably won't discuss it till May or June, and it'll be in place for the new chairs in September. I think that's a pretty good time frame. There's nothing urgent about it. Since it's not urgent, I'd rather do it right rather than fast.
Actually, Marty, I thought this came up, well, there was a couple reasons why it came up. But wasn't one issue whether there could be committees that don't allow public discussion or participation? I mean, they have to be present, but do they always have to have permission to talk? Like,
No.
in exec,
Open
we
meetings
never
law-
used to have the public talk and.
Open meetings law requires the public to be present, does not
Present.
require them to speak.
Right, so one of the issues that come up then, I thought was which committees, are the exception, or, which ones would allow the public to participate actively in. So I don't know if you want to address that as well in this.
Which committees are they?
Exec and LRE, I guess, are the ones that do not, and of course, different for the full board meeting, because that's gallery session only, right? So I think we do want to state which are the exceptions, or I don't know.
You
It's
have
a
your hand
question.
up, David. Is there a budget committee or is just you?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Yeah. No, technically, I think it's me and Laura and I think the treasurer, I forget.
Actually, I think it's all chairs are technically on the budget committee, I think, right?
I honestly don't remember. I did
Yeah.
look at it months ago, but
Well,
But
David
if it-
does actually
Look at
call me
Lisa's
sometime.
description.
Something I was surprised about and didn't know how it was done. But at an unnamed meeting with an unnamed chair, there was a sign-up sheet prior to the meeting. And so that's the appropriate thing to do. We do that at the community board. Sign-up sheets made sense at physically present meetings. But for our community meeting, people call in advance and are placed on the sign-up sheet by virtue of that call. And they won't do that unless they're aware that's the process they need to follow.
Mhm.
Having said that, I'm still not hearing anything other than give it to Lisa. Is that the will of the committee?
Let's do the negative. All opposed?
Kelly, I haven't heard from you at all tonight.
I am fine with the document as it is. And I, like Steve, believe that having a one-page primer for people, new chairs and older chairs, is extremely helpful. So I'm fine with the document as is.
Great,
I will
Kelly.
say what you have on the screen highlighted where it says sign up speech, it should read sign up sheet and not speech.
And Kelly, have you seen the manager's guide that's posted on the website?
I have seen the manager's guide. However, I also think that the manager's guide is helpful, but when you're looking to get a quick
Mhm.
hit on something that having a one-page primer doesn't hurt. It
Right,
can't.
well, Kelly, the guide is a one page on different topics. So here's a page, there's a page on another subject, there's a page on another subject. So
Okay,
that's, I agree with one page summaries.
What's the harm in having everything aggregated into one document so people don't have to look at different documents?
Well, that's what it is. It's put all together. So it's under the resource section for board members. And it's one page on meetings, one page on posting for the community, one page for minutes, things like that. So it's exactly what you're looking for, but it's put in one aggregated document. Anyway. Okay.
So at the moment, I've heard 4 votes, to put it off, Lisa and David, and 2 to go forward, Kelly and Steve. Anybody else wish to be heard?
You know what? I don't need to do any more work. Put it forward as you want, Marty.
Well, it's not what I want, it's what's coming from the committee without wordsmanship.
I think it's fair to say that we agree on the content. I think the idea of Lisa incorporating it into the procedures manual or whatever you call it, I think is a good one, and we should do both of them. And it could just simply be presented to the board as this is what we've done. Doesn't necessarily need a board vote. Sort of like, the parks guide or the housing guide or the seniors guide.
So am I to understand that at next month's exec, I'm going to present a one-page document, which you see in front of you, for their consideration, and then to provide to the community board, this one-page document. And it doesn't require a vote. Particularly, we've done things like that before in terms of the guides. And simultaneously, Lisa will find what she believes is the appropriate place to place it in the manual. Is that what I'm hearing? Is there anyone negative minded toward that?
I'm not negative, but I'm going to abstain from a decision on this particular matter.
And I'm confused. So, am I rewriting it, or are we just gonna stick this in the
Yes.
manual? If that's what it is, that's fine. I mean, and that's up to the chair. It's not up to me.
Well, the two questions was content and location. We're dealing now with content, and I was gonna leave it to you to find location.
Well, location's easy. It's a resource for members, so that's where it goes. Yeah, but content, then, if you don't want it, looked at, maybe put into a consistent type of format that we've used before, maybe making reference to Robert's rules or whatever, in the appropriate line item.
Lisa, I think we can trust you to do the appropriate, what's that word? Wordsmithing.
Wordsmithing, yeah.
Well, unless you're gonna change side to back, I don't think wordsmithing's allowed. And I also don't believe that the intent was to put asterisks and some footnotes and whatever to muddy the waters. So someone reading this would know they have to run somewhere.
Okay, so
Validation.
other sections of the procedure guide is very clear. Why don't you take a look at it? See if that's the format you want, and we'll put it in that format. They're all based on laws. How we take minutes, how we post agendas, how we put together resolutions. A one page on how to put together resolutions is in there. So, if that's what you'd like, we'll work this into a one page, I don't know.
May I make a suggestion?
David?
Lisa, if you could write it in the form or format that you've done for the rest of the procedures, and then run it by Marty, and if he wants, if he has any objections or wants any further input, he could run it by us. But I'm confident that what you'll come up with is going to be 97% of what Marty would want to see.
Mhm.
You taking that responsibility, Lisa?
I'll do it, I just, but if you want it like 1, 2, 3, exactly like this, then, that's a Xerox, So that's it. I would be pleased to put it in the format as the other documents, in the same spirit of education, as the other documents.
Between now and the executive meeting, do you think that's enough time?
Yeah, that's fine.
And if I agree, have I crossed the line between wordsmithing and not having a public meeting?
I think the difference is that Lisa's just making changes and submitting them essentially to you for your, I guess, acceptance, removal, whatever. The difference is there's not a majority of committee members who are having a conversation. That's it. It's that trigger of the meeting, a majority of members meeting to discuss business. That's the trigger.
So Lisa, I look forward to hearing from you. And the next executive meeting, I hope to present something.
Okay.
Either
Great.
like this or in Roman numerals or whatever it takes.
Right. It's just for easy eyeballing, you know? No.
Excellent.
Okay, I think we've,
So basically, it's just going to stay the way it is, right? You're just putting it into a different format.
Yeah, I mean, it might be, you know, some principles. I mean, I hope I could add a principle like the purpose of this, you know, or I have to go back and see, but it will be this point. I'm not going to change anything, but it would be more explanatory, maybe. Different font. I don't know.
All right. And if we're not voting on this particularly, Marty? Because otherwise I'm abstaining from it.
well, I now have 2 abstentions. That's all I've heard. Therefore, I'm presuming everyone else is voting in favor. Or has a positive
am.
sentiment. You am what?
What you just said, voting in favor for it.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I have Dan and Sylvia abstaining. And Lisa has more responsibility. So I think we've set a record for the longest meeting that I've held of this committee. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, yes, approval of the minutes. Lisa, you forgot.
Okay.
So here are the minutes from last month. I do have a request from, where is it? A request from Rosemary
Yeah.
that in the minutes, it said right here, her recollection that COIB, and as Alex also pointed out, it came from the law department. And so that correction needs to be made.
Yep.
You know, Kira should be able to get that. You know, it should be in file, and she, you know, I know that our speaker today is going to go find it, but really our office should have that letter.
Well, I had not asked, but I'm gonna wait to hear from Alex, who sounded positive. He knows exactly who to contact.
All right, with that change, I move that the minutes be
Hold
approved.
on.
Also,
One correction, Marty, if you go up to the attendance, please, can you remove the extra O that's in my name?
Extra.
You want to be a
oh,
Buford, not a Buford?
Correct. Yes,
and also Martin,
Thank
in my
you.
name, if you could add an U, please, TEPLUS under guests. Remove the I after
Hold
L
on,
and insert a
Hold
U.
on, I need to be consistent. Hold on. Whoops, remove the wrong letter. Sorry, Kelly.
no worries, thank you.
And Camilla, what did I do wrong?
I also need the U after L, Tepelus, LUS, and remove the I. Thank you.
And my battery is running low. I'm gonna have to leave. Oh,
So the
no.
timing is perfect.
Yep.
So I thank you all for an energetic meeting. And wish you all whatever holiday you're celebrating, enjoy it and be healthy and take care all.
Have a good Pesach.
Thank you.
Have a safe flight.
Thank you,
Thank
Martin.
Thank you,
Take care.
Marty.